of Orthodox spirituality.
Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy.
A wondrous journey into Orthodoxy.
Lord, have mercy.
Prepared and presented by Angeliki Antonakou, Lekea.
God is the Lord and has appeared unto us. Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord.
Hello, dear listeners. We are continuing to read from the book Family Life, the 4th volume in the series Spiritual Counsels by Saint Paisios. The Faith-Filled Wife. Yaronda. A wife was abandoned by her husband, who even took their child, and now has relations with 2 other women. She has asked me what to do. Tell her to be as patient as she can, to pray and to behave with kindness. She should wait. She herself should not break up the marriage. There once was a man who abused his wife, treated her badly, but she faced all this with patience and kindness, until she died rather young. When they exhumed her body, a sweet fragrance issued from the grave. Everyone who was there was surprised and puzzled. You see, she had lived her life with forbearance and was rewarded in the other life. There's another case I have in mind. A young worldly fellow fell in love with a girl who was living a spiritual life. In order to make her like him, he started going to church and tried to live a spiritual life. They got married, but years later the husband returned to his worldly life. Even though they had 3 grown children, 1 boy in college and 2 younger girls, 1 in middle school and 1 in high school, he continued to live prodigally. He owned a large company and made lots of money, most of which he squandered with his lavish lifestyle. His poor wife held the home together by being frugal, and kept their children on the right path by giving them love and sound advice. She never spoke badly about their father, as she didn't want to traumatize or influence them. When he came home late at night, she would make up excuses for him, saying that he had work. But in the middle of the day, when he would come home with some girlfriend of his, what excuse could she give then? So what did this godless man, who didn't deserve to be called a human, as he had no humanity about him, do? He would call ahead to his wife and ask her to prepare one of his favorite meals, and then show up with one of his girlfriends. The poor mother always received them with kindness, giving the children the impression that the girlfriend was one of her friends, and that their father had stopped by her house in order to bring her to theirs for dinner. She would then send the children to their rooms to study, because she feared that they might see something unseemly, as the father did not hesitate to behave inappropriately even in his own home. This happened so frequently with so many different women that the children began to ask their mother, "Mother, how many friends do you have?" "Oh, these are my friends from long ago," she would answer. In the meantime, her husband abused her and treated her worse than a servant. Just think of that mother and what she had to endure day in and day out, while serving 2 beasts who dishonored the home. And still, she constantly tried to instill good thoughts in her children. And it wasn't as if she knew that this would soon be over, so as to say, "I'll be patient and find some consolation." This situation went on for many years. But because this deplorable man had given many rights to the devil, it was only to be expected that he would be under terrible demonic influences. He was like a demented man who had no control over himself and found fault in everything around him. One day, as he was driving like a madman, drunk with carnal passion, He lost control of his car and fell into a ditch. The car was totaled, and he was seriously injured. He was transferred to the hospital, and after a long recovery, was brought home, a crippled man. No girlfriend would come near him now, for he was no longer rich, and his face was badly deformed. The good wife, however, continued to take care of him, without reminding him of his prodigal past. This moved him profoundly and transformed him spiritually. He sincerely repented, asked to go to confession, lived a few years in a Christian way with inner peace, and finally reposed in the Lord. After his death, his son took over the business and provided for his family. The children lived in harmony and love because they had received a good foundation from their good mother. Now, that mother was a true heroine. She drank all that poison in order to keep the family together and protect the children from becoming bitter. She held that family together correctly. She even saved her husband and gathered in heaven a treasure for herself. God will certainly place this woman in the best mansion of heaven. Children from broken homes. Yaronda, when the husband has some serious passion, acknowledges his fault, confesses, but is still under the influence of his passion, and tells his wife, "I'm causing you and the children a lot of pain. Maybe it would be better if I went away, so you are no longer troubled by me, and I will send you money from wherever I am." What should the wife do? If the husband truly believes what he is saying, this means that he has much philotimo, and the wife should try to be patient. But of course, it's better not to believe what she hears too readily. She ought to look deeper into this. You see, sometimes the husband may say, "I should go away and not trouble you," with an assumed nobility of spirit. But in reality, he just wants to go away and be with another woman. Nowadays, the way it's been degraded, marriage has lost its meaning. Families break up for the slightest reason. Not long ago, a completely disoriented man came to the Kalivi. He had fathered 2 children with a girlfriend. Then he married someone else, had a child with her, and then he divorced her. Then he married another woman who was also divorced and who had 2 children from her first marriage and a third one with a boyfriend. He had 2 more children with this wife. As he was relating this information to me, I had to say, "Now hold on, just how many mothers and how many fathers do these children have?" This is how these poor children are tormented and driven to destruction. Children who are sensitive and unable to get over the problems imposed by their parents' lifestyles fall into despair, and some commit suicide. Others turn to alcohol in order to forget their problems, while others get involved with drugs. Where do they find the money? The smallest dose of heroin costs over 4,000 drachmas. The larger dose is 6,000 or 7,000. This was said in 1990. These children are the result of the previous generation's wild ways. I wonder, too, what will become of the younger children who are products of the automatic divorce. This past summer, a lot of young men who were taking drugs came by the Kalivi to see me, and most of them were from broken homes. It's terrible to see them in such a situation, at the age of 27, asking for help. And you know, you can spot those from broken homes a mile away. At the Kalivi, I keep the lukumia, Greek jelly-like sweets, easily available. When these youth come, they grab the sweet, then they run to kiss me, and I end up covered in sugar from head to toe. Love and affection have been missing from their lives. For these youth, whether they have parents or not is all the same to them. It makes no difference for them if the father is coming or going. It doesn't matter if he's home or not. For them, it's all the same. He's wrong, I'm right. I've noticed that some spiritual fathers tell the men who have problems with their wives, "Be patient. This is the cross you have to bear." What can we do? You will receive a reward from God. Then they tell the same thing to the wives. Be patient. You will have a reward from God. In other words, both may be at fault. but the spiritual father tells each of them to be patient. Or one of them may be at fault, and the spiritual father still tells him to be patient. But now, the one who is indeed at fault is at peace, believing that he is suffering, tolerating the other person, but who is actually the one causing the pain. A man once came to the Kalivi and told me he had problems with his wife. They were heading for divorce. They couldn't stand to see each other. They were both teachers and had 2 children. They never ate at home as a family. They ate at separate restaurants after school, and they brought sandwiches home for the children to eat. When the parents returned home, those poor children would rummage through their pockets and bags to see what they had brought home for them to eat. It was a real drama. The father even served as a chanter in the church. His wife attended one church, and he chanted in another. So he told me, "What can I do, Father? I'm bearing a heavy cross, a very heavy cross. We constantly fight." "Have you gone to your spiritual father?" I asked him. "Yes, I have," he replied, and he told me to be patient, for I'm bearing a heavy cross. So I started on him. Let's take things from the start and see who's bearing a heavy cross. "When you got married, did you argue like this?" "No," he said. "For 8 years we loved and cared for each other. I worshipped my wife more than God. But then she changed. She started to complain and became very fussy." Can you believe that? He worshipped her more than God. "Come over here," I told him. "You worshipped your wife more than God. Is it your wife's fault, or is it yours that your family is now in this condition? Because of you, God removed His grace from your wife. And what are you thinking of doing now?" I asked him. "We are probably going to get a divorce," he said. "Have you become involved with another woman?" "Yes, there is someone," he said. "Don't you see that you are really the one at fault? First, you must ask God to forgive you for worshiping your wife more than Him. Then go and ask forgiveness from your wife. Tell her, 'Forgive me. I am at fault for creating the conditions we have at home and for causing the children to suffer.' Then go to confession and be sure to worship God as God and to love your wife as your wife, and you will see everything will be all right." I think I shook him up a little. He started to cry. He promised that he would follow my advice. He came back after some time had passed, and he was very happy. "Thank you, Father, you saved us," he said. "My wife and I and the children are all doing very well now." Do you see? He was the one who was at fault, but he thought he was the one bearing a heavy cross. You also ought to be careful and not excuse the women who come and complain about their husbands. I don't excuse either of them. Instead, I ask them questions and try to get them thinking. Let's say the wife tells me, "My husband drinks, comes home late at night and curses." "Look," I tell her, "when he comes home late at night drunk, treat him with kindness. Don't start whining and complaining. Why are you late? What time is this for you to come home? Will you never change? How long am I supposed to put up with you?" And if you keep a long face, you can be sure that the devil will come to tell him, "You're such a loser for staying with this foolish woman. Why don't you go and party with another?" You may be in the right, but the devil will lead him astray. Now, if you treat him kindly, if you are patient and pray fervently without complaining about what he is doing, he may see a little sunshine. He may come to his senses and correct himself. Then when the husband comes and tells me, "My wife is whining and shouting at me," I scold him. Your children and your poor wife anxiously wait up for you until midnight, and you come home drunk and start cursing. Shame on you. Is this why you got married? To torment your wife and your children? There may be times where both spouses are in the right. Once I was talking to a group about how pure General Makriyanis was, for he had both physical and spiritual purity. Yannis Makriyannis was a general in the Greek Revolution of 1821 and a great fighter. But then someone interrupted to say, "Don't tell me they are trying to make Makriyannis into a saint." "And why not?" I asked him. "Because he beat his wife," he answered. Look, let me explain what happened. When Makriyannis happened to have an occasional 5 drachmas and a widow with children came for help, he would give it to her. His wife would then complain, "Why did you give the money away? You too have children." And he would dismiss her with a slight slap, saying, "You have your husband who will support you, but that poor woman has no one. Who's going to support her?" In other words, they were both justified. Also, keep in mind that if one of the two lives spiritually, then he is not in the right, even though he may be. You see, a spiritual person is expected to face an injustice in a spiritual manner. In other words, a spiritual person must face all things with divine justice by looking to see what will benefit the other person. For when one is weak and makes a mistake, then he is somewhat entitled to a little leniency, because there are extenuating circumstances. But when one who is in a better spiritual condition doesn't display any understanding, then he will be at greater fault. What would happen if spiritual people face things just like everybody else, in a worldly manner, with a worldly human justice? They would be constantly going to the worldly courts. This is why people are tormented. Part 2. Parents and their obligations. Those parents who have been delivered of children, having given them their bodies, must also contribute as best they can to their spiritual rebirth. Chapter 1. Childbearing. Saints Joachim and Anna, the most dispassionate couple. Yeronda, tell us something about Saint Anna and Saint Joachim, the ancestors of God. Some time ago, you started telling us something about them. Ever since I was a young boy, I had great reverence for the ancestors of Jesus Christ, according to the flesh. In fact, I had mentioned to someone that I wanted to be given the name of Joachim when I became a monk. We are all so indebted to them. Saints Joachim and Anna are the most dispassionate couple that has ever existed. They had no carnal mindset at all. This is how God had made man, and this is how He wanted humans to be born, dispassionately. But after the fall, passion infiltrated the relationship between man and woman. As soon as a dispassionate couple was found, just as God had created man, and just as He had wished them to be born, Panagia was born, that pure and chaste creation, and then Christ incarnated. A thought occurs to me that Christ would have descended to earth sooner if a pure pair such as Saints Joachim and Anna had existed. Roman Catholics fall into error and believe, supposedly out of piety, that Panagia was born without the original sin. While Panagia was not exempt from the original sin, she was, however, born as God had wanted human beings to be born after creation. She was Panagni, all pure, because the holy ancestors' conception of her was passionless, that is, without sensual pleasure. The holy ancestors of Jesus Christ, after fervent prayer to God for the gift of a child, conceived not by carnal lust, but through obedience to God. I had experienced this fact on Mount Sinai. Abstinence in married life. And God saw everything that He had made, and behold, it was very good. Genesis 1:31. A man feels a physical attraction for a woman, as does a woman for a man. Without this attraction, no one would ever set out to start a family. Instead, they would only consider the difficulties they would have later in family life, with raising children and so forth, and they would never decide to make a start. In those years after the fall of the first created, Adam and Eve, the carnal mindset in some people might have been 5%, in others 10%, 30%, and so on. Nowadays, however, where is anybody going to be found who has a carnal mindset of only 5%? That is, one who has a pure frame of mind. At any rate, God has given all people the potential to attain dispassion if they struggle with philotimo. The married are not justified simply because they lead a married life, in forgetting that they are not only flesh but also spirit, and should therefore not let themselves be unbridled. They must struggle to subjugate the flesh to the spirit. If they struggle to live spiritually, with the guidance of their spiritual father, little by little they will begin to taste higher delights, spiritual and heavenly ones, and they won't seek the carnal ones. They have an obligation to struggle to practice temperance, so as to not impart these carnal passions to their children. You see, young children whose parents have a heightened carnal frame of mind will, from a young age, also have these inclinations, because they get their carnal mindset from their parents. At first, these passions are very slight, as are all hereditary passions, much like the stinging nettle, very soft at first and easy to touch, but extremely itchy when full-grown. And they can be cured by a good spiritual father who has discernment. If, however, they are not treated at a young age, the children will need to struggle mightily when they are older in order to rid themselves of these passions. Human reason in the will of God for childbearing. Oftentimes, couples tell me of their insecurities regarding the topic of childbearing and ask for my opinion. Some only want 1 or 2 children, while others want to have many. However, it would be to their advantage to leave this matter of childbearing up to God, to entrust their life to divine providence, and not set up their own plan. They must have faith in God, who cares for the birds of the air, who will care much more for their children. Once there was a sailor who married at the age of 18. He was poor, and so was the girl he married. They rented a small basement apartment to live in. The wife also found a little work, and they lived very frugally. Just imagine that for a table they were using a crate left over from some peaches they had once bought. Later, they had children, living very thriftily in order to raise them. And yet, little by little, they became prosperous homeowners. Some couples try to take care of everything else before they start to think about having children. They don't consider God in the least. Again, some others say, life is hard enough today. You can barely raise 1 child. And they don't go on to have other children. Of course, they don't realize how sinful this kind of thinking is, because they do not entrust themselves to God. God is compassionate and merciful. As soon as He sees that they can't cope, it's not hard for Him not to give them more children. So many people go into marriage without considering that they should also plan on having children and raising them in a Christian manner. They don't want a lot of children, so they won't have to be bothered. Instead, they have dogs and cats in their homes. I was told that some people now, in America, this was in 1990, instead of having a dog at home, have some kind of pig, which is very expensive and doesn't grow to be too big. They've made the pigs that way so they can keep them in their homes. They don't want to have children because it's a pain to wash and care for them, and instead they're cleaning after piggies. At least a dog can keep watch, but to have pigs in the house, now this is too much. In Australia, I saw a nursing home for elderly dogs and cats, even a cemetery for animals. The way people are going, they'll be raising mice to make cat food and rabbits for dog food, while other people are dying of hunger. Nowadays, if someone were to kill a dog, he might actually get into more trouble than if he were to kill another person. Of course, depending on whose dog it was. Just look at where we've come to. A man is worth less than a dog in our days. And I'm also amazed by what some spiritual fathers say these days. Some time ago, some pilgrims came to the Kalivi and asked me, Yeronda, does St. John Chrysostom write anywhere that married couples should not have children? What are you talking about? Where did you hear such a thing? I asked. Well, Father so-and-so told us, they replied. So I got a hold of that father and asked him, did you say such a thing? Yes, he replied. Where did you find that written? I asked him. St. John Chrysostom mentions it in his homily on virginity, he said. Look, I responded, I haven't read St. John Chrysostom, but I do know that the saint cannot be saying something like that. He must be saying something else. Bring the book here and let me see what he has written. He brought the book and showed me the passage. I read and saw that the saint had written the following. Now the number of people has increased, and you are also given the chance to live in virginity. It is not like the days of old, when it was a necessity to have descendants. So clearly, St. John Chrysostom is not saying, do not procreate children. And yet the father insisted he was right. Imagine a priest who's also a theologian saying such things. He wanted to show off that he had read Chrysostom and written dissertations, and he was even considered to be a good spiritual father. Can you imagine what harm these erroneous interpretations do to people who are just looking to find some comfort for their concerns? Nowadays, a family is something meaningless for a lot of people who lead a secular life. This is why they either don't get married, or they do get married and don't have any children, or they kill the children through abortions, thus wiping out their whole kin by themselves. They are self-destructive. They are not destroyed by God. However, the faithful who keep the commandments of God receive divine grace, because God is somehow obligated to help them through the difficult years in which we live. And we see Christian families all around us with as many children as God has given them, raising them with the fear of God in their hearts. And all the children are well balanced, joyful, a blessing from God, and they progress in life. Just when we are about to say, what is the world coming to? We see now a new, good generation going forward with the grace of God. Yes, the devil may destroy, but the good God is also at work and will not allow our human race to be annihilated. Dear listeners, thank you for listening. Our time is up, but we will continue once again where we left off in our next show. Until then, be well.
Remembering His mercy, have helped His servant Israel as He promised to our forefathers and Abraham and his seed forever.
Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy. Lord, have
Readings of Orthodox Spirituality.
Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy.
A wondrous journey into Orthodoxy.
Lord, have mercy.
Prepared and presented by Angeliki Antonakou, Lekea.